I never thought I'd be the woman with a bruised cheek and a shattered marriage, standing in a lawyer's office watching my husband's world collapse around him. But life has a way of revealing people's true colors when money enters the picture. When my grandmother left me her fortune, I discovered just how quickly love can turn to violence, and how satisfying justice can be when the tables finally turn. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The day everything changed was deceptively ordinary. Boston in October is a special kind of beautiful, crisp air, trees painted in crimson, and gold, that particular slant of sunlight that makes everything look like it's been dipped in honey. I remember noticing all of this as I walked up the brick pathway to our Victorian townhouse in Beacon Hill, my hands still cold from the autumn chill despite my leather gloves. I'd just finished meeting with my grandmother's estate lawyer, Mr. Donovan, a kind-eyed man with silver temples who had handled my family's legal affairs for decades. My grandmother Eleanor, Nana L to me, had passed away 2 months prior, leaving behind not just a void in my heart, but also a substantial inheritance that I was still coming to terms with. "Diana?" I called out as I entered our home, the familiar scent of cinnamon and cloves welcoming me. Mark, my husband of 8 years, insisted on keeping seasonal potpourri throughout the house, one of his many particular preferences that I'd learned to accommodate over the years. "In the study," came his reply, his voice carrying that slight edge it often had when he was engrossed in work. I hung my camel coat in the entryway closet and made my way through our meticulously decorated home. Mark had an eye for design. It was part of what made him successful in the hospitality business. His small boutique hotel in downtown Boston had grown from a risky venture to a respected establishment over the past 5 years, though lately he'd been talking about expansion, about taking the Morgan Hotel brand to the next level. I found him at his desk, surrounded by blueprints and financial projections, his sandy blonde hair slightly rumpled from running his hands through it, a habit when he was frustrated. Even in a simple navy sweater and jeans, he looked like he belonged in the pages of a lifestyle magazine. "How was the meeting?" he asked without looking up, his eyes fixed on the spreadsheet before him. I perched on the leather armchair across from his desk, still processing everything Mr. Donovan had explained to me. It was informative. There's a lot to take in. This caught his attention. Mark finally looked up, his hazel eyes studying me with that intensity that had once made my heart race, but lately made me feel like I was being assessed rather than loved. "Did Donovan give you the final numbers?" His voice was casual, but I noticed how he straightened, how his entire body seemed to shift toward me. I nodded slowly. "Yes, Nana L's estate is settled. The inheritance is substantial. More than I expected." A smile spread across Mark's face, and he pushed away from his desk, standing to come around to my side. He knelt before me, taking my hands in his. "That's wonderful news, Diana." His thumbs traced circles on my palms. "Your grandmother always said she'd take care of you. I know how much you miss her." For a moment, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with, the charming, thoughtful Mark Morgan who'd wooed me during my final year of art history graduate school, who'd convinced me that we could build a beautiful life together. "I do miss her," I said softly. "She was my rock after Mom and Dad died." Mark nodded sympathetically. My parents had been killed in a car accident when I was 25, leaving Nana L as my only family. She'd raised me after my mother, her only daughter, had married my father against her wishes and moved cross-country. We'd reconciled years later, but those early years of separation had made our bond all the more precious when we found our way back to each other. "So," Mark said, rising to sit on the edge of his desk, "what are we looking at? Ballpark figure?" Something in his phrasing made me hesitate. There had been a time when Mark's business success had been our joint victory, when his ambitions had seemed like shared dreams. But over the past few years, something had shifted. The we in our relationship had slowly morphed into Mark's vision, Mark's plans, Mark's future, with me playing a supporting role rather than standing as an equal partner. Just over 4 million, I said, watching his reaction carefully. After taxes. His eyes widened, a flash of something, excitement, calculation, crossing his features before he controlled his expression. Diana, that's incredible. He moved to the small bar cart in the corner of the study, pouring 2 fingers of scotch into crystal tumblers. This calls for a celebration. He handed me a glass, raising his own in a toast. To Eleanor. She always did know how to make an exit. I sipped the amber liquid, feeling it burn down my throat. Mr. Donovan said the funds will be available next week. I've been thinking about what Nana would want me to do with it. Mark settled back at his desk, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. And what have you decided? I'm not entirely sure yet, I admitted. Part of me wants to establish a scholarship foundation in her name at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. She always regretted not pursuing her artistic talents, and she was so supportive of my studies. I saw a flicker of impatience cross Mark's face before he masked it with a smile. That's a lovely thought, Di. A real tribute to her memory. He took a sip of his scotch. But you know, I've been thinking too. This inheritance couldn't have come at a better time. I felt a subtle tension enter the room. Oh? The expansion plans for the Morgan. He gestured to the blueprint spread across his desk. We're so close to securing that property in Chicago, but the investors are getting cold feet with the current economic climate. If we could show them we have significant capital backing, it would change everything. The way he said we made something twist in my stomach. You want to use Nana's inheritance for the hotel expansion? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mark leaned forward, enthusiasm lighting his features. Not all of it, of course, but even half would be enough to push the project forward. Diana, this could be huge for us. For our future. Morgan, Chicago. Would double our revenue within 3 years. We could open locations in New York, Miami, LA. His eyes had that gleam they got when he was envisioning his empire. I set my glass down carefully. Mark, I haven't even had time to process this. The inheritance, Nana's passing, it's a lot to take in. I don't want to make hasty decisions. His expression shifted subtly. There's nothing hasty about it. I've been working on these expansion plans for over a year. You've seen the projections. The return on investment would be extraordinary. It's not about the return, I said, feeling a familiar sense of being steamrolled. It's about honoring Nana's legacy. This money represents her life's work, her choices. I want to be thoughtful about how I use it. Mark's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And investing in our future, in our business, isn't honoring her legacy? Eleanor always said she wanted you to be secure, to have the life you deserve. Yes, but... Diana, he cut in, his voice taking on that smoothly persuasive tone he used with difficult clients. Think about what we could build together. Morgan could become a national brand. We're talking about creating a legacy of our own. I stood up, needing to create some physical distance between us. I understand that, and I'm not saying no to supporting the business. I just need time to think about the right balance. I walked to the window, looking out at the maple tree in our small backyard, its leaves a brilliant orange against the darkening sky. Mark came up behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders, his chin dipping to my ear. Of course you need time, he said, his voice softening. I didn't mean to pressure you. It's just exciting to think about the possibilities. His hands massaged my shoulders, and I found myself relaxing despite the unease that lingered beneath our conversation. Let's table this for now, he suggested. Have dinner, open some wine, and we can discuss it another day when you've had time to process everything. I turned to face him, searching his expression. The Mark I'd fallen in love with seemed to be looking back at me, understanding, patient, Kind. Maybe I was overreacting, seeing problems where there were none. That sounds perfect, I agreed. The next few days passed in a strange dance of normalcy and underlying tension. Mark didn't bring up the inheritance directly, but I noticed subtle references dropped into conversation. A mention of how the Chicago property might be snapped up by competitors, comments about the upcoming deadline with investors, observations about how Eleanor had always admired his entrepreneurial spirit. It was on Friday evening that things came to a head. We'd had a quiet dinner at home, Mark opening an expensive bottle of Bordeaux that he'd been saving for a special occasion. As we moved to the living room with our wine, I could sense him preparing to broach the subject again. I spoke with Jason. Today? He said casually, referring to his business partner. The investors are asking for our final proposal by the end of next week. I nodded, curling my legs beneath me on the sofa. That's pretty soon. It is. Mark swirled his wine, studying the way it clung to the glass. Diana, I know you're still thinking about the inheritance, but we need to make a decision. This opportunity won't wait. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Something in his phrasing, his assumption of the collective we regarding my inheritance, sparked a flare of irritation. Mark, I understand the timeline for your business opportunity, but this is my inheritance. I need to make decisions that feel right to me. He set his glass down with deliberate care. Your inheritance? Our future. Isn't that how marriage works? What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine. I laughed, but it wasn't humorous. That's interesting coming from you. When you started Morgan, you were very clear about keeping the business in your name only. You said it was cleaner that way. His expression hardened. That was different. The hotel was my vision, my expertise. And this is my inheritance, from my grandmother. Mark stood up, pacing the living room. I'm not trying to take it from you, Diana. I'm talking about investing in our shared future. Do you know how many hours, how much of myself I've poured into building this business? All for us, for the life we want to create. I felt my own frustration rising to match his. I know how hard you've worked, and I've supported you every step of the way. I've attended every investor dinner, charmed every potential client, put my own career on hold more times than I can count. But this decision about Nana's inheritance, it's important to me to honor her memory in the right way. And what would Eleanor want? Mark challenged. She'd want you to be successful, to be secure. She'd want me to be happy, I corrected, and to make choices that reflect my values, not just chase after more money and status. A flash of something ugly crossed Mark's face. Is that what you think of me? That I'm just chasing money and status? I backpedaled, not wanting the conversation to derail further. No, that's not what I meant. I know you're passionate about Morgan, about what you've built. I'm just saying that I need to find my own passion for this inheritance. Maybe that includes supporting the expansion. Maybe it includes other things too. Mark poured himself more wine, his movements precise and controlled, in a way that I recognized as him holding back anger. What about transferring the inheritance? Into our joint account? He suggested. That way we can decide together how to allocate it. Some for the business, some for your scholarship idea, some for our future. A warning bell sounded in my mind. Mark had never shown interest in our joint account before. In fact, he'd always maintained separate finances for his business dealings, leaving the joint account for household expenses. I don't think that's necessary, I said carefully. We can make those decisions without changing where the money is held. He laughed, a short, hard sound. You don't trust me with your grandmother's money, after 8 years of marriage. That's not fair, Mark. This isn't about trust, it's about control, he finished for me. You want to control the money, just like Eleanor always controlled everything around her. I stiffened at the jab toward my grandmother. Don't bring Nana into this. She has nothing to do with how you're acting right now. How do I'm acting? His voice rose. I'm trying to secure our future, Diana. The Chicago property is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Do you know how many hoops I've jumped through to get us to this point? And now, when we're inches from the finish line, you decide to get sentimental about your grandmother's money? I stood up, my own anger flaring. It's not about sentimentality. It's about making thoughtful choices instead of rushing into something because it fits your timeline. Why are you pushing so hard on this? Morgan is doing well. If the Chicago expansion is such a solid investment, why can't you find other investors? Mark's face flushed. Because I don't want other investors diluting my vision. Because I thought I could count on my wife to believe in me, to support me. Because I've worked myself to the bone building something for us. He was shouting now, something he rarely did. I took a step back, suddenly aware of how tall he was, how he loomed over me in his anger. Mark, please, let's take a breath and discuss this rationally. Rationally? He spat. There's nothing rational about turning your back on your husband when he needs you. When were you planning to tell me about your meeting with Donovan this week? Did you think I wouldn't find out? I froze. How do you know about that? Mark smirked. Boston's a small town, Diana. Did you really think I wouldn't hear that my wife was meeting with her lawyer behind my back? It wasn't behind your back, I protested. I was finalizing details about the inheritance. And frankly, given how you're acting right now, I'm glad I met with him privately. Something dangerous flickered in Mark's eyes. So now I'm the villain for wanting to discuss our financial future? For expecting my wife to be honest with me? You're twisting my words, I said, frustration building. I just want to be thoughtful about this decision. I want to honor Nana's— Eleanor is dead, Mark shouted, making me flinch. She's gone, Diana. And these theatrics about honoring her memory are just excuses to keep control of the money yourself. I stared at him, shocked by his vehemence. This isn't about control. This is about respect. For Nana, for myself, and for the impact this money could have if used wisely. Respect? Mark laughed bitterly. Where's your respect for me? For everything I've built? For our marriage? A marriage is a partnership, I said quietly. Not one person making all the decisions. So transfer the inheritance, he challenged. Show me that you see us as equals. Show me that you trust me to make decisions for our future. I shook my head. No, Mark. Not until we've had proper time to discuss how the money should be used, to make a plan that honors both our priorities. His face contorted with fury. You selfish, entitled— He took a step toward me, his fists clenched at his sides. You have no idea what it's like to build something from nothing, to take risks, to put everything on the line. You've always had Eleanor's safety net. That's not fair, I whispered, hurt by his characterization. I've worked hard too, in my own way. Your own way, he mocked. Playing at being a museum curator while your grandmother paid your graduate school tuition, while I was working 16-hour days to launch the Morgan? Each word felt like a slap. The contempt in his voice for my career, for my relationship with Nana L. It revealed something I'd sensed but never wanted to acknowledge. Mark didn't see me as an equal. He saw me as an accessory to his ambitions, a convenient connection to wealth and status. I think we need to take a break from this conversation, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We're both saying things we don't mean. I turned to leave the room, but Mark grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. We're not done talking about this, he growled. I need an answer about the money. Now. I tried to pull away, fear beginning to mingle with my anger. Let go of me, Mark. You're hurting me. The money, Diana. Are you going to transfer it or not? I looked into the face of the man I'd married, searching for the person I thought I knew. In that moment, I saw only a stranger, his features twisted with greed and rage. No, I said firmly. I won't transfer the inheritance. Not until we've had time to think clearly and make decisions together, as actual partners. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Mark's face flushed dark red, a vein throbbing at his temple. His grip on my arm tightened painfully, and then his other hand swung up, connecting with my cheek in a sharp crack that echoed through our carefully decorated living room. The force of the slap knocked me sideways. I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of the sofa, my hand flying to my stinging face. For a moment, the room was utterly silent except for our ragged breathing. Mark stood frozen, his hand still raised, shock replacing anger on his face as he registered what he'd done. "Diana," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean—" I straightened slowly, my cheek burning, my vision blurred with tears of pain and shock. In that crystalline moment of clarity, I saw our marriage for what it truly was. Not the partnership I'd believed in, but a carefully constructed facade hiding an ugly truth. Without a word, I walked past him, climbed the stairs to our bedroom, and began to pack a bag. As I methodically folded clothes and gathered essentials, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't just about the slap, or even about the inheritance. This was about years of subtle control, of belittling comments disguised as concern, of my own identity slowly being erased to make room for Mark's ambitions. When I came downstairs with my suitcase, Mark was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands. He looked up, his face stricken. "Diana, please, I lost my temper. It will never happen again, I swear." I set my bag down, reaching into my purse for my phone and keys. "You're right about one thing, Mark. It will never happen again." "Where are you going?" he asked, panic entering his voice. "We need to talk about this. We can work through this." I paused at the door, looking back at our beautiful home, at the life we'd built that now lay in ruins around us. "I'm going to stay with Rachel," I said, naming my closest friend. "Don't call me. Don't come looking for me. My lawyer will be in touch." As I walked out into the cool October night, leaves crunching beneath my feet, I felt a curious mixture of grief and liberation. The life I thought I had was over, shattered by a single act of violence that had revealed an ugly truth I could no longer ignore. But somewhere beneath the shock and pain, I felt something else stirring. A determination, a resolve, a certainty that whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. Nana L. had always told me I had a steel spine beneath my gentle exterior. Now was the time to prove her right. Rachel's guest bedroom became my sanctuary that night. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, staring at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The red mark on my cheek had already begun to darken into what would undoubtedly be a bruise by morning. My phone, set to silent, flashed repeatedly with Mark's calls and messages, each one more desperate than the last. "Diana, I'm so sorry. Please come home so we can talk. This isn't us. We don't do this." I don't know what came over me. I turned the phone face down, unable to bear the stream of apologies that felt hollow against the throbbing in my cheek. Rachel had taken one look at my face when I arrived on her doorstep and immediately switched into crisis mode, a skill honed from her years as an emergency room nurse at Massachusetts General. "Ice," she'd said firmly, guiding me to her kitchen. 20 minutes on, 20 off, and you're staying here tonight. No arguments." Now, as midnight approached, Rachel knocked softly on the guest room door. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice gentle. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She entered carrying a steaming mug of tea and a small white pill on a saucer. "Chamomile with honey," she said, setting the mug on the nightstand, "and ibuprofen for the swelling. Doctor's orders." I took the pill gratefully, washing it down with a sip of tea. "Thank you for everything." Rachel sat beside me, her dark eyes serious. "Do you want to talk about it?" The dam broke. Words poured out of me. Mark's demand for my inheritance, his escalating anger, the shock of his hand striking my face, the sickening realization that our marriage had been built on shifting sands. Rachel listened without interruption, her expression transitioning from concern to outrage. "He hit you," she said when I finished, her voice flat with fury. "Diana, this isn't something you come back from." "I know," I whispered, and saying the words aloud made them real in a way I hadn't fully processed until that moment. "I'm not going back." "Good." Rachel squeezed my hand. "Tomorrow we get practical. Tonight you rest." But rest wouldn't come. I lay awake in Rachel's guest room, watching shadows play across the ceiling as questions circled in my mind. How had I missed the signs? Had they always been there? Mark's need for control? His subtle undermining of my independence? Or had success changed him, turning ambition into something darker and more consuming? I thought about the early days of our relationship, Mark's charm, his attentiveness, the way he'd made me feel like the center of his world. When had that shifted? When had I become an accessory to his ambitions rather than a partner in our shared life? The night stretched endlessly as I cataloged moments that took on new meaning in retrospect. Mark's insistence that I quit my curatorial assistant position at the museum when the hotel opened, framed as concern for my work-life balance. His gradual isolation of me from friends who didn't understand our lifestyle. The way he'd subtly criticized my spending while justifying his own business expenses. The increasing frequency with which he made decisions about our future without consulting me. By dawn, I had reached a cold clarity. This wasn't just about one moment of violence. It was about recognizing a pattern of control that had been tightening around me for years. The slap was simply the final revelation, the irrefutable evidence I could no longer ignore. When Rachel found me in her kitchen the next morning, methodically squeezing oranges for fresh juice, my mind was made up. "I need a lawyer," I said without preamble. "Not just Mr. Donovan. He handles estate matters. I need someone who specializes in divorce." Rachel nodded, pouring herself coffee. "I have a name. Vanessa Wright. She helped my sister through her, divorce last year. She's tough as nails and doesn't take any crap." "Call her," I said, focusing on the simple task of juice extraction to keep my hands from shaking. "And I need to go to the bank today. I need to make sure Mark can't access any of my accounts." "We'll take care of it," Rachel assured me. "But first, let me look at that cheek." She examined my face with professional detachment, her fingers gentle, as they probed the bruising. "You should document this. Photos, date, time, a written account of what happened while it's fresh." "Evidence," I said, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "Evidence," Rachel confirmed. "Mark messed up, and there should be consequences." As we finished breakfast, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Mark, again. This time I answered, putting it on speaker so Rachel could hear. "Diana." Mark's voice was ragged with what sounded like a sleepless night. "Thank God. Please come. Home. We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Baby, please. What happened last night? It was a mistake. A terrible, awful mistake that will never, ever happen again. I swear on my life. You hit me, Mark." Saying it aloud felt like lancing a wound. Painful but necessary. "I know." His voice broke. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I've already called Dr. Liston about anger management counseling. I'll do whatever it takes, Diana. Just come home so we can work through this together." I closed my eyes, steeling myself against the pleading in his voice. Once that tone would have melted my resolve. "I'm not coming home. I'm staying with Rachel for now. I've made my decision." "What decision?" His voice sharpened slightly. "I'm filing for divorce." Silence stretched across the line, followed by a soft, disbelieving laugh. "Divorce?" "Diana, you're overreacting. One argument, one mistake. It wasn't one argument, I cut in. It was the moment I finally saw our marriage clearly. You don't respect me, Mark. You never have. His tone changed, hardening. So that's it? 8 years of marriage thrown away because of one bad night? What about everything we've built together? You built a business. I built a life around supporting your dreams while setting aside my own. And when I finally inherited something that was mine, something that could have been used for both our futures if you'd been willing to compromise, you tried to take that too. This is about the money, he said flatly. You're choosing your grandmother's inheritance over our marriage. No, Mark. I'm choosing myself for the first time in years. Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on a calculating tone I recognized from his business negotiations. You know this will get messy if you push forward. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. As your husband, I'm entitled to a fair share of all marital assets, including your inheritance, since it came during our marriage. A chill ran through me. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts, Diana. If you walk away now, you walk away with nothing. The house is in my name. The cars are in my name. Even your precious art collection is technically marital property. Rachel's eyes widened as she listened, and she mouthed silently, He's bluffing. You should talk to a lawyer before you make threats, Mark, I said, drawing strength from Rachel's support. Mr. Donovan made it very clear that inheritance is separate property, not marital assets, and we'll see what a judge has to say about your financial control over the past 8 years. Financial control? Mark's laugh was brittle. I gave you everything, Diana. The house, the vacations, the lifestyle. Everything you have is because of me. Goodbye, Mark. I ended the call, my hand trembling despite my outward composure. Rachel whistled low. Well, that answers the question of whether this divorce will be amicable. It never would have been, I realized. Mark doesn't lose gracefully. Then we make sure he loses spectacularly, Rachel said, reaching for her phone. I'm calling Vanessa right now. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Rachel's call to Vanessa Wright resulted in an emergency appointment that afternoon. A visit to my bank secured my inheritance and personal accounts. By evening, I had begun the administrative demolition of my married life, methodically separating my finances, my legal identity, and my future from Mark's. Vanessa Wright's office in downtown Boston exuded confidence and success. The woman herself matched her surroundings, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her silver-streaked black hair pulled into a sleek chignon, her dark eyes sharp behind designer glasses. Mrs. Morgan, she began, then corrected herself when she saw me flinch. Ms. Price, then, tell me everything, beginning with the inheritance and ending with that bruise on your face. For the second time that day, I recounted the story of my grandmother's legacy and Mark's violent reaction. Vanessa listened without interruption, taking occasional notes in a leather-bound portfolio. First things first, she said when I finished. Your husband is incorrect about the inheritance. In Massachusetts, inherited property is generally considered separate from marital assets, provided it hasn't been commingled with joint accounts. Based on what you've told me, you've kept it separate, which means it's protected. Relief washed over me. What about the house, the art collection? We'll need to go through your finances thoroughly, but if your records show that you contributed significantly to those purchases, we can make a case for equitable distribution. Massachusetts. Courts consider numerous factors, including length of marriage, contributions of each spouse, and future earning potential. She leaned forward, her expression intensifying. Now, about the physical abuse. Have you filed a police report? I hesitated. No, I wasn't sure if I should. It's your decision, Vanessa said carefully. But documenting the incident could strengthen our position. especially if you decide to file for a restraining order. The phrase restraining order made the situation suddenly, jarringly real. This was happening. I was dismantling my marriage, preparing for a legal battle against the man who had been my partner for nearly a decade. "I need to think about the police report," I said finally. "But I do want to move forward with divorce proceedings as quickly as possible." Vanessa nodded. "We'll file immediately. In the meantime, don't return to the house alone. If you need to collect personal belongings, we can arrange for a police escort. And under no circumstances should you discuss financial matters or settlement terms with Mark directly. All communication goes through me." As I left Vanessa's office, clutching a folder of preliminary paperwork, I felt a curious mixture of dread and liberation. The path ahead would be difficult, perhaps ugly, but it was a path of my own choosing. For the first time since the night of the slap, I felt a flicker of something like hope. That feeling was short-lived. When I returned to Rachel's apartment, her expression told me something was wrong before she spoke. "Mark came by," she said, her voice tight. "About an hour ago." I froze. "Here? How did he know where to find me?" "He said he called the hospital, and someone told him I was off today. He must have figured out you'd come to me." Rachel's tone made it clear exactly what she thought of that violation of privacy. "He wanted to talk to you, and said he wouldn't leave until he did. I told him you weren't here and that if he didn't leave, I'd call the police." "Did he go?" "Eventually." "But Diana," she hesitated. "He wasn't himself. There was something in his eyes, something cold and calculating. He said if you went through with the divorce, he'd make sure you regretted it. That there were things you didn't know about him, about the business." A chill ran through me. "What things?" He didn't say, but I got the impression he was implying something, not above board. I sank onto Rachel's couch, my mind racing. What? Didn't I know about Mark's business? The Morgan Hotel had been successful from the start, rising quickly from a boutique establishment to a premier destination. Mark had always attributed it to his business acumen, his eye for design, his talent for customer service. But had there been something else behind that meteoric rise? "I need to call Vanessa," I said, reaching for my phone. Vanessa's response was immediate and decisive. "This changes things. If there is potential financial impropriety at the business, we need to know about it. I'm going to bring in a forensic accountant to look into the Morgan's finances." "Can we do that?" "I'm not an owner or investor." "No, but as his spouse during the period in question, you have certain rights. And if he's threatening you based on business matters, a judge will likely grant us discovery access." Vanessa paused. "Ms. Price, I need to ask, do you have any reason to believe your husband might be involved in illegal activities?" The question struck me like a physical blow. Did I? Mark had always been ambitious, driven, sometimes ruthless in business matters. But illegal? The Mark I thought I knew would never cross that line. But then the Mark I thought I knew would never have struck me either. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I intend to find out." That night, as Rachel and I sat in her living room with takeout containers from our favorite Thai restaurant, I found myself recalling conversations, meetings, phone calls that I'd overheard or been partly privy to over the years. Mark had always kept me at arm's length from the business operations, claiming he wanted to spare me the stress and complications. "It's so strange," I said, pushing rice around my plate without eating. Looking back, I realize how deliberately Mark kept me separate from the business side of his life. At the time, I thought he was being protective. "Or making sure you couldn't see what he was doing," Rachel suggested. The opening of the Morgan was so fast, I remembered. From purchasing the property to the grand opening was less than a year. Everyone in the industry was amazed at how quickly it happened, how Mark secured permits and licensing in a city known for bureaucratic delays. "Connections in the right places?" Rachel suggested. "Maybe." I frowned, recalling another detail. "And there was that investor, Victor Pelletier. Mark never introduced us, even though all the other investors came to our home for dinner at some point. Mark said Victor was private and preferred to remain a silent partner. Rachel set down her fork. Diana, what are you thinking? I'm thinking. I need to learn a lot more about my husband's business dealings. I reached for my phone. And I know exactly where to start. The next morning, I found myself in the offices of James Richardson, my grandmother's financial advisor for over 30 years. James had semi-retired, passing most of his clients to younger partners, but he'd kept Nana L's account out of personal loyalty. When I called requesting an urgent meeting, he'd immediately made time. Diana, he greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk. His smile faltered when he saw my face. My dear, what happened to you? I touched my cheek self-consciously. The bruise had darkened overnight, a visible record of Mark's violence that no amount of concealer could fully hide. That's part of why I'm here, James. I need your help. Over the next hour, I explained my situation. The inheritance, Mark's demands, the slap, my decision to file for divorce, and my growing suspicions about the Morgans' rapid success. James listened with increasing concern, his kind face hardening into something more resolute as my story unfolded. I always thought there was something off about that young man, he said when I'd finished. Too polished, too perfect. Eleanor felt the same way, you know. I stared at him. Nana didn't like Mark? She never said anything to me. Eleanor believed in letting people make their own choices, even mistakes. But yes, she had her reservations about your husband. She thought he was too interested in her money, not interested enough in your happiness. The revelation stunned me. Nana L had always been unfailingly polite to Mark, if not effusive. I'd interpreted her reservation as a simple generational difference, not disapproval. Why didn't she tell me? James smiled sadly. Would you have listened? I had to admit I wouldn't have. In those early days with Mark, I'd been too enchanted, too certain we were building something special together. James, I need to understand Mark's business dealings. I have a lawyer who's bringing in a forensic accountant, but I was hoping you might have connections in Boston's financial community, people who might know things about the Morgan that aren't in the public record. He nodded slowly. I may know a few people. But Diana, if you're going down this road, you need to be prepared for what you might find. If Mark has been involved in anything irregular, it could get complicated. I need to know, I said firmly. Not just for the divorce, but for myself. I need to understand who I was really married to all these years. James studied me for a long moment, then reached for his phone. Thomas Peterson at First Boston Trust. He specializes in hospitality financing. If anyone knows the inside story of the Morgans' funding, it would be him. As James arranged a meeting with Thomas for later that day, I felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. Whatever secrets Mark had been keeping, I was about to uncover them. And with that knowledge would come power. The power to reclaim my life, my identity, and my future on my own terms. For the first time since Mark's hand had struck my face, I felt something like strength flowing through me. The path ahead was uncertain, possibly dangerous, but I would walk it with my eyes wide open. No more willful blindness, no more comfortable illusions. Thank you, James, I said as he hung up the phone. For everything. He reached across the desk to squeeze my hand. Eleanor would be proud of you, Diana. She always said you had a spine of steel beneath that gentle exterior. I think we're about to find out just how right she was. Thomas Peterson's office at First Boston Trust occupied the corner of a sleek, high-rise downtown, offering panoramic views of Boston Harbor. The man himself matched his surroundings, polished, imposing, clearly accustomed to power. He rose from behind his desk when his assistant showed me in, his handshake firm and assessing. Ms. Price, he greeted me, using my maiden name as James, had instructed. James Richardson speaks very highly of you. Please have a seat. I settled into the leather chair across from him, acutely aware of my bruised face. Thomas's eyes flickered to the discoloration briefly before returning to meet my gaze, his expression revealing nothing. James mentioned you have questions about the Morgan Hotel Group, he said, getting straight to business. May I ask why? I had prepared for this. On James's advice, I kept my explanation simple but honest. I'm in the process of divorcing Mark Morgan, the owner. Given certain revelations about his character, I have concerns about potential financial improprieties that might affect me as his spouse. Thomas steepled his fingers, studying me thoughtfully. I'm sorry about your situation. Divorce is never easy. He paused. Ms. Price, before we continue, I should clarify something. First Boston Trust has no direct financial relationship with the Morgan Hotel Group. What I can share with you is general industry knowledge and public information. I understand, I said, recognizing the careful legal boundaries he was establishing. Any insights you can provide would be helpful. He nodded and pressed a button on his desk phone. Sandra, could you bring in the hospitality sector portfolio, please? The public records section. While we waited, Thomas made small talk about the harbor view, the unseasonably warm autumn, James Richardson's legendary golf game. I played along, recognizing this as the dance of the financial world, building rapport before discussing business. Sandra arrived with a sleek tablet, which she handed to Thomas before departing discreetly. He tapped the screen a few times, then looked up at me. The Morgan Hotel opened 5 years ago in what was previously the Harborview building, he began. The property was purchased for $12.5 million, with another estimated $8 million in renovations. The hotel has been profitable since its second quarter of operation, quite impressive in the hospitality industry, where new properties typically take 18-24 months to break even. None of this was news to me. Mark had proudly shared these statistics at countless dinner parties. What about the funding structure? I asked. Were there unusual aspects to how the Morgan secured its initial investment? Thomas's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, interest, perhaps, or caution. The funding came from a consortium of private investors, led by Morgan himself with a 51% stake. The remaining 49% was divided among 5 investors. He hesitated. There was one aspect that raised eyebrows in financial circles. The speed with which permits and licenses were approved was remarkable. Boston's building commission is notoriously thorough, yet the Morgan cleared every regulatory hurdle in record time. How unusual is that? Let's say it typically takes 18 months to navigate the permitting process for a project of that size. Morgan did it in under 6. I leaned forward. And how would someone accomplish that? Thomas set the tablet aside. Ms. Price, I'm not suggesting anything improper occurred. There could be perfectly legitimate explanations. An exceptionally organized application process, prior relationships with regulatory officials, good timing. But you don't believe that's the case. He met my gaze directly. It's not my place to speculate. I recognized a closed door when I saw one. Thomas wasn't going to explicitly voice suspicions, but he'd given me enough to confirm my own. What about the investors? I tried another angle. Particularly Victor Pelletier. Do you know anything about him? The change in Thomas's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. A slight stiffening of his posture, a tightening around his eyes. Victor Pelletier is not someone I'm personally familiar with, he said carefully. His name appears on some investment documents, but he maintains a low profile in Boston's financial community. Is that unusual? Some investors prefer anonymity. In itself, it's not necessarily concerning. Thomas paused. Ms. Price, given the nature of your inquiries, may I suggest you speak with someone who has expertise in forensic accounting? If you have specific concerns about the Morgan's financial practices, that would be the appropriate avenue to explore. I nodded, recognizing both the suggestion and the subtle indication that our meeting was concluding. Thomas had given me what he could without crossing professional boundaries. "Thank you for your time," I said, rising. "You've been very helpful." At the door, Thomas stopped me with a light touch on my arm. "Ms. Price?" he said quietly. "Be careful. Financial investigations can uncover unexpected complications. Make sure you have proper legal protection before proceeding further." The warning sent a chill down my spine. "Thank you," I said. "I will." Outside, Boston's autumn sunshine did little to warm the cold apprehension settling in my stomach. Thomas's carefully worded responses and final warning confirmed my suspicions. There was something questionable about the Morgans' meteoric rise, something potentially dangerous to uncover. Back at Rachel's apartment, I found a business card that had been slipped under the door. Vanessa Wright's name was printed on the front, with a handwritten note on the back. "Call me ASAP. Important developments." "Developments?" Rachel echoed when I showed her the card. That was fast. I dialed Vanessa's number with shaking fingers. She answered on the first ring. "Diana," her voice was clipped, professional. "My office, 1 hour. I've found something you need to see." Vanessa wasn't alone when I arrived. A thin, bespectacled man with prematurely gray hair occupied one of the chairs facing her desk, a laptop open before him. He rose when I entered, extending his hand. "Ms. Price, I'm Gabriel Moss. Ms. Wright engaged me to conduct a preliminary financial review of the Morgan Hotel Group." "Gabriel is one of the best forensic accountants in New England," Vanessa explained as we all sat. "And he's found some interesting discrepancies." Gabriel adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Price, I should preface this by saying I've only had access to public records thus far. Without a court order, I can't examine internal financial documents or private banking records. However, even with these limitations, certain patterns emerge." He turned his laptop so I could see the screen, which displayed a complex flowchart of companies and individuals. The Morgan Hotel Group is owned by a parent company, Morgan Hospitality Holdings LLC. That LLC, in turn, has 6 registered stakeholders: your husband with a 51% share, and 5 others with varying percentages. He pointed to one name. Victor Pelletier holds 15%, making him the second largest stakeholder. "Who is Victor Pelletier?" I asked, voicing the question that had been nagging at me since my meeting with Thomas. Gabriel's expression turned grave. "That's where things get interesting. On paper, Victor Pelletier is a Canadian businessman with investments throughout New England. In reality, the Victor Pelletier who appears on the Morgans Incorporation documents doesn't seem to exist." I stared at him. "What do you mean, doesn't exist?" "The Social Security number listed belongs to Victor Pelletier, who died in 1983. The address is a vacant lot in Montreal. The phone number connects to a burner phone that's no longer in service." Gabriel closed his laptop. "In short, someone created a paper identity using a dead man's name." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Mark, my husband, the man I had built a life with, was involved with a phantom investor, a fabricated identity. What else had he lied about? "There's more," Vanessa said, her tone gentle but firm. Gabriel traced the initial funding for the Morgan. The money trail leads to a series of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. "Money laundering?" I whispered, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "Potentially," Gabriel confirmed. "But without access to complete financial records, I can't definitively prove it. What I can say is that the funding structure is deliberately complex, designed to obscure the original source of the money." Vanessa leaned forward. "Diana, this is serious. If Mark is involved in financial crimes, you could potentially be implicated as his spouse. We need to move aggressively to protect you." "How?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "First, we expedite the divorce filing. with clear documentation that you had no knowledge of or involvement in the Morgans' financial operations. Second, we approach the district attorney's office with what we've found. The DA? Panic flared in my chest. You want me to report my husband to the authorities? It's about protecting yourself, Vanessa emphasized. If these financial irregularities lead to criminal charges, you need to establish your innocence early and clearly. I closed my eyes, trying to process the surreal turn my life had taken. A week ago, I had been planning how to honor my grandmother's legacy with her inheritance. Now I was discussing potential criminal activities by my husband with a lawyer and a forensic accountant. There's something else you should consider, Gabriel said gently. These financial structures, the phantom investor, the offshore accounts, didn't happen by accident. They required planning, expertise, and connections. Your husband likely didn't set this up alone. Partners, I said, understanding Dawn. You think Mark has partners in whatever he's doing? It's highly probable, Gabriel confirmed. And if those partners learn that you're investigating their operation— He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The implicit threat hung in the air between us, adding a new dimension of fear to my already overwhelming situation. I need time to think, I said finally. This is a lot to process. Vanessa nodded, her expression softening slightly. Of course. But Diana, we don't have the luxury of moving slowly. If Mark suspects we're looking into his finances, he might take steps to hide evidence or move assets beyond reach. Or worse, Gabriel added quietly. I looked at him sharply. What do you mean, worse? Gabriel and Vanessa exchanged glances. It was Vanessa who answered, her voice steady and direct. Diana, people who engage in these types of financial schemes often have other connections. People who help them avoid scrutiny, who ensure cooperation from officials, who handle problems when they arise. The implication chilled me to the bone. You think I'm in danger? I think caution is warranted, Vanessa replied carefully. Which is why I've already drafted an emergency restraining order. She slid a document across the desk. All it needs is your signature. I stared at the paper, the legal language blurring before my eyes. This was real. This was happening. My husband, the man who had once promised to love and protect me, might pose a genuine threat to my safety. With trembling fingers, I signed the restraining order. What happens now? I asked, setting down the pen. Now we move quickly, Vanessa said, her professional demeanor returning as she gathered the signed document. Gabriel continues his investigation. I file for emergency asset freezing to prevent Mark from moving money out of reach. And you? She paused, studying me with concern. You need to stay somewhere safe, somewhere Mark wouldn't think to look for you. Rachel's apartment was already compromised. Mark knew about my friendship with her, had already tracked me there once. But where else could I go? Most of my friends in Boston were connected to Mark in some way. Friends from his social circle who would undoubtedly take his side, or business acquaintances who might inadvertently reveal my whereabouts. Then inspiration struck. My grandmother's house in Cambridge. It's been sitting empty since she passed. Mark never liked going there, said it was too old-fashioned, too far from the city center. He might not think to look for me there. Vanessa nodded approvingly. Perfect. And it's in your name now? Yes. It was transferred directly to me through the estate. Even better. Mark has no legal right to enter the property. She made a note in her portfolio. Change the locks anyway, and install a security system if there isn't one already. I'll have the restraining order processed today and served to Mark by tomorrow morning. As the meeting concluded, Gabriel walked me to the elevator. His manner, kind but concerned. Ms. Price, he said quietly as we waited for the doors to open. I deal with financial crimes regularly in my work. I've seen how these situations can escalate. Please take the safety precautions seriously. I nodded, throat tight with unshed tears. I will. Thank you, Mr. Moss. Gabriel, please. He handed me a business card. Call me directly if you think of anything else that might be relevant to the investigation. Unusual visitors to your home, conversations you overheard, documents you might have seen. Even small details can be significant in cases like this. The elevator arrived, and as I stepped in, Gabriel added, "And Ms. Price, you're doing the right thing. Difficult, but right." Those words echoed in my mind as I took a taxi to Rachel's apartment to gather my few belongings. The right thing. Was it? A week ago, I couldn't have imagined reporting my husband to authorities, exposing potential crimes, dismantling the life we'd built. But then, a week ago, I couldn't have imagined Mark striking me either. Rachel helped me pack, her nurse's efficiency a steadying presence as my emotions threatened to overwhelm me. I spoke with campus security at the hospital, she said, folding a sweater into my suitcase. They're aware that Mark might show up looking for me, trying to find you. They'll alert me if he does. I paused in collecting my toiletries. Rachel, I don't want to put you at risk. If Gabriel is right about Mark having dangerous connections— Stop right there, Rachel interrupted, her dark eyes flashing. I've been your friend since college. I'm not abandoning you now, when you need support more than ever. Besides, she added with grim humor, I've dealt with aggressive family members in the ER. I know how to handle myself. Her loyalty brought fresh tears to my eyes. Thank you, I managed. For everything. Don't thank me yet, she replied, zipping the suitcase closed. Thank me when this is all over and Mark gets what's coming to him. As we prepared to leave for my grandmother's house in Cambridge, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it warily, then froze. I know what you're doing, the message read. Stop now, or you won't like the consequences. I showed the text to Rachel, whose face hardened. Mark? I don't know. The number isn't familiar. My hand trembled as I held the phone. Should I reply? No, Rachel said firmly. Screen capture it and send it to Vanessa. This is exactly the kind of threat the restraining order is meant to address. I did as she suggested, adding a note explaining the circumstances. Vanessa's response was immediate. Do not engage. Save all communications. Have you left Rachel's yet? About to, I texted back. Take a different route than planned. Pay cash for transportation. Call when you arrive safely. The precautions felt surreal, like something from a thriller movie rather than my actual life. But as Rachel and I slipped out the back entrance of her apartment building, scanning the street for unfamiliar cars or watching eyes, I realized that the danger was real. Whether the text had come from Mark or someone connected to him, the message was clear. My investigation had touched a nerve. We took a circuitous route to Cambridge, switching taxis twice and finally walking the last few blocks to my grandmother's Victorian house. The property stood apart from its neighbors, set back from the street behind a wrought iron fence and mature maple trees, their leaves brilliant orange and red in the autumn sun. As I unlocked the front door, memories washed over me. Childhood visits filled with Nana L's cookie baking and storytelling, teenage summers spent exploring Boston with her as my guide, adult conversations about art and history over tea in her sunroom. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old books enveloped me as I stepped inside, bringing a bittersweet ache to my chest. It's beautiful, Rachel said softly, gazing around at the polished hardwood floors, antique furniture, and walls lined with bookshelves. So much history here. Nana loved this house, I replied, setting down my suitcase in the foyer. She always said it had good bones and a kind heart. As we moved through the rooms, drawing curtains and turning on lights against the gathering dusk, I felt my grandmother's presence, not in a ghostly way, but in the choices she'd made. The objects she'd loved, the space she'd created. For the first time since Mark's betrayal, I felt something like peace. "You'll be safe here," Rachel said as we sat in the kitchen, mugs of tea warming our hands. "It's like a fortress, with all these locks and that iron fence, and I'll check on you every day." I smiled gratefully, even as a new wave of exhaustion washed over me. The events of the past days, the confrontation with Mark, the revelations about his business, the threatening text, had drained me completely. "You should rest," Rachel advised, noticing my fatigue. "I'll make up the bed in your grandmother's room." I nodded, too tired to argue. As Rachel bustled upstairs, I gazed around the kitchen, taking comfort in its unchanged state. The 1950s cabinets Nana had refused to modernize. The vintage stove she claimed made the best roasts in New England. The wooden table where we'd shared countless meals and conversations. On impulse, I opened the small drawer beside the sink where Nana had kept important notes. Phone numbers. Recipes, reminders. Inside, beneath a stack of notepads and pens, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in her elegant script. With trembling fingers, I opened it, unfolding a letter dated just weeks before her death. "My dearest Diana," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've returned to the house we both loved. I hope it brings you comfort, as it always did me. I've left you my worldly possessions, but more importantly, I hope I've left you the wisdom to use them well. Trust your instincts, my darling girl. They're better than you know. And remember that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fires. Whatever challenges you face, you have the strength to overcome them. All my love, always, Nana L." Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the letter to my chest. It was as if she'd known somehow, had sensed that I would need her guidance precisely when she could no longer provide it in person. "Trust your instincts," she'd written. My instincts had been trying to warn me about Mark for longer than I'd admitted to myself. Those moments of discomfort when he dismissed my opinions, the subtle alarm bells when he isolated me from friends, the quiet voice inside that questioned his motives even as I silenced it with explanations and excuses. No more. From this moment forward, I would trust myself, would honor the strength my grandmother had always seen in me. As I carefully refolded the letter, my phone buzzed with an incoming email. It was from Gabriel Moss, the subject line simply, "Found. Something." With steady hands, I opened the message. "Ms. Price," Gabriel had written. "In reviewing public records related to the Morgan's initial permit applications, I discovered something unusual. The Boston Building Commission officer who approved the expedited permits was Andrew Kelly. He happens to be married to Elizabeth Kelly, maiden name Elizabeth Morgan, your husband's sister. This connection was never disclosed, which represents a clear conflict of interest and potentially illegal nepotism. I'm continuing to dig but wanted to share this immediately. Stay safe. Gabriel." I stared at the screen, a peculiar calm settling over me. This was it. The first concrete evidence of impropriety, the first thread that, when pulled, might unravel Mark's carefully constructed facade. Rachel returned to find me still sitting at the kitchen table, Nana's letter in one hand, my phone in the other, a new resolve hardening within me. "Everything okay?" she asked, concerned in her voice. I looked up at my friend, a smile slowly spreading across my face. Not of happiness, but of determination. "No," I said quietly. "But it will be." The next morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight streaming through the stained glass panels that flanked my grandmother's front door and casting jewel-toned patterns across the entryway floor. I had slept fitfully, my dreams troubled by shadowy figures and half-heard threats, but woke with a sense of purpose that overrode my fatigue. Over coffee in Nana L's sun-drenched kitchen, I called Vanessa to share Gabriel's discovery about Mark's sister's husband approving the hotel permits. "This is significant," Vanessa said, her voice crackling with energy despite the early hour. "Clear nepotism, possibly criminal. I'm contacting the DA's office today. What will that mean for Mark? I asked, surprising myself with the question. After everything he'd done, why did I still care? Potentially serious consequences, Vanessa replied. If the DA finds evidence of bribery or corruption, Mark could face criminal charges. At minimum, there will be an investigation that could expose whatever else he's been hiding. A knock at the front door interrupted our conversation. Through the peephole, I recognized the delivery uniform of a local courier service. I need to go, I told Vanessa. Someone's at the door. Be careful, she cautioned. Remember the restraining order should have been served to Mark by now. He might not take it well. I approached the door cautiously. Who is it? Delivery for Diana Price, came the response. Need a signature. I opened the door just enough to see a young woman holding an envelope and a digital signature pad. I can sign for that, I said, keeping the chain lock engaged. After scrawling my signature, I took the envelope and quickly closed and locked the door. The sender information showed Vanessa Wright's law office. Inside was a copy of the restraining order, now officially served on Mark, along with a brief note from Vanessa. Filed and served at 8:30 a.m. Call if there are any issues. My phone rang almost immediately. Mark's name flashed on the screen, sending a jolt of anxiety through me. I declined the call, then watched as text messages began to appear in rapid succession. A restraining order? Seriously? You've lost your... Call me now! This isn't funny, Diana. You have no idea what you're doing. The last message carried an unmistakable threat, reminiscent of the anonymous text from yesterday. I forwarded the entire thread to Vanessa with a brief note. Started immediately after the restraining order was served. Her response was instantaneous. Do not respond. Document all contact attempts. Call the police if he appears at your location. I silenced my phone as the messages continued to arrive, each one increasingly angry and desperate. This wasn't the Mark I knew, or thought I knew. This was someone else entirely, someone volatile and dangerous. An hour later, Rachel arrived, bringing groceries and updates. Security stopped Mark at the hospital this morning, she reported, unpacking bread and fresh fruit. He was looking for me, demanding to know where you were. When they wouldn't let him in, he made a scene in the phi lobby. They had to threaten to call the police before he left. My stomach knotted with a mixture of fear and guilt. Rachel, I'm so sorry to put you in this position. She waved away my apology. Don't be. Mark's true colors are showing, and everyone can see them now. She paused, studying my face. How are you holding up? Better than I expected, I admitted. Being here in Nana's house, it helps. And finding her letter, I gestured to where I'd carefully placed it on the refrigerator with a magnet. It feels like she's still looking out for me. Rachel read the letter, her eyes softening. She was an incredible woman, and she was right about you having strength. I don't always feel strong, I confessed. That's the thing about strength, Rachel replied, squeezing my hand. It's not about feeling invincible. It's about continuing to move forward even when you're afraid. Our moment was interrupted by my phone buzzing with a call from Gabriel Moss. Ms. Price, he began without preamble. I've been continuing my investigation into the Morgans' finances, and something unusual has emerged. Are you in a secure location where we can speak freely? I glanced at Rachel, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, I'm at my grandmother's house with a friend. You're the speaker. Good. I've been tracing the money flows through the Morgans' various accounts, and I've discovered a pattern of transactions that don't align with normal hotel operations. Every month for the past 3 years, significant sums, between $75,000 and $200,000, have been transferred from the Morgans' operating accounts to a shell company called Harborview Enterprises. Harborview, I repeated. That's the name of the building the Morgan was converted from. Exactly, Gabriel confirmed. On the surface, the transfers appear to be lease payments, as if the Morgan is renting the property from Harborview Enterprises. But here's where it gets interesting. According to property records, the Morgan Hotel Group purchased the Harborview building outright. There should be no lease payments. So the money is going… where, exactly? Rachel asked. That's what I'm, still trying to determine. Harborview Enterprises is registered in Delaware with minimal disclosure requirements. The money trail leads to accounts in the Cayman Islands and then seems to disappear. Money laundering, I said, the word still feeling surreal on my tongue. It has all the hallmarks, Gabriel agreed. Regular transfers of substantial sums through a legitimate-appearing business, then routed through jurisdictions with strong banking secrecy laws. But why? Where is the money originally coming from? That's the million-dollar question. Literally. My working theory is that the Morgan is being used to launder proceeds from another enterprise, possibly an illegal one. The hotel provides a perfect cover, cash-intensive business, high volume of transactions, regular international clients, easy to blend illicit funds with legitimate revenue. The implications made my head spin. Mark wasn't just cutting corners or engaging in nepotism to speed up permits. He was potentially involved in serious organized crime. Ms. Price, Gabriel continued, his tone gentle but urgent. I've shared this information with Ms. Wright, and she agrees. We need to take this to the authorities immediately. This goes beyond civil divorce proceedings or financial impropriety. If Morgan is indeed laundering money, federal agencies need to be involved. I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what I was hearing. By reporting Mark, I wouldn't just be ending my marriage or exposing a conflict of interest. I would be potentially sending him to federal prison. I need to think, I said finally. This is overwhelming. Of course, Gabriel replied, but please don't take too long. If Mark suspects we're onto the money laundering operation, he might take drastic steps to cover his tracks, or worse. After we hung up, Rachel sat beside me, her expression grave. Diana, I know this is hard, but you heard Gabriel. This could be dangerous. I know. I stared out the kitchen window at my grandmother's carefully tended garden, now overgrown in her absence. It's just, how did I not see any of this? We were married for 8 years. How could I have been so blind? You weren't blind, Rachel said firmly. You were trusting. There's a difference. Mark deliberately kept you away from his business dealings. He constructed an entire separate life that you weren't meant to see. But there must have been signs, I insisted. Things I missed or ignored. Rachel considered this. Maybe, but hindsight is 20/20, and Mark was clearly very good at maintaining his facade. My phone buzzed again, another text from Mark. This one simply read, "We need to talk, in person, today, or things will get ugly." I showed it to Rachel, who frowned. That sounds like a threat. You should forward it to Vanessa. As I did so, a notification popped up on my screen. An email from Thomas Peterson, the financial executive I'd met with yesterday. The subject line read, "Urgent, please call." With a growing sense of dread, I dialed his number. "Ms. Price," he answered immediately. "Thank you for returning my call so promptly. Something has come to my attention that I thought you should know. One of my colleagues was at the Morgan this morning for a breakfast meeting. He overheard a heated conversation between your husband and another man, someone he described as expensive but dangerous looking. They were discussing someone named Victor and mentioned a situation that needed to be contained immediately. My blood ran cold. Victor Pelletier, the phantom investor whose identity had been fabricated using a dead man's name. Did your colleague hear anything else? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Only fragments. Something about damage control and making sure she understands the stakes. Thomas paused. Ms. Price, given our conversation yesterday, I felt compelled to alert you. This sounded concerning. Thank you, I managed. I appreciate the warning. After hanging up, I relayed the conversation to Rachel, whose expression grew increasingly alarmed. Diana, this is serious. If Mark is involved with dangerous people, and they're talking about containing situations, she didn't need to finish. The threat was implicit. My investigation was becoming a liability to whatever operation Mark was running, and someone, Mark or his associates, might take steps to silence me. I need to call Vanessa, I said, reaching for my phone. Before I could dial, there was a loud, insistent knocking at the front door. Rachel and I froze, exchanging alarmed glances. "Are you expecting anyone?" she whispered. I shook my head, rising slowly and moving toward the entryway. Through the side window, I caught a glimpse of Mark's familiar silhouette on the porch. "It's him," I hissed, backing away from the door. "It's Mark." Rachel immediately pulled out her phone. "I'm calling 911. The knocking came again, harder this time, rattling the heavy wooden door in its frame. "Diana," Mark's voice called. "I know you're in there. We need to talk." I retreated to the kitchen, heart pounding as Rachel spoke quietly, but urgently to the emergency dispatcher. "Yes, he's violating a restraining order," she was saying. "The address is 1842 Brattle Street in Cambridge. Please hurry." "Diana," Mark shouted again, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "This has gone far enough. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. You're making a huge mistake." I heard a scraping sound, as if he was trying to force the lock. Panic surged through me. Would the police arrive in time? What if Mark got inside before help came? Rachel ended her call. "Police are on their way. 5 minutes," they said. She looked around frantically. "We should barricade ourselves somewhere. The bathroom, maybe? Does it have a lock?" I was about to agree when a new sound broke through Mark's shouting. Another voice, authoritative and stern. "Sir, step away from the door." Through the side window, I saw a Cambridge police cruiser in the driveway, an officer approaching the porch with a hand near his holster. "This is a private matter," I heard Mark argue. "My wife and I are having a disagreement, that's all." "Sir, I have a report of a restraining order violation. I need to see some identification." There was a tense pause, then the sound of Mark's voice, now modulated to its most charming register, the tone he used with difficult hotel clients or reluctant investors. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding. My wife and I had an argument, and she overreacted. I'm just trying to speak with her. Nevertheless, sir, I need to verify the restraining order status. Your ID, please." The exchange continued as the officer checked Mark's identification against police records. I watched from the window, scarcely breathing, as Mark's demeanor shifted from charm to irritation to barely controlled rage when the officer confirmed the restraining order was valid and in effect. "You need to leave the premises immediately, sir," the officer stated firmly. "Violation of a restraining order is a criminal offense. You can come with me voluntarily, or I can place you under arrest." Mark's face contorted with fury, but he managed to control himself. "Fine, I'm leaving, but this isn't over." He shot a venomous glance toward the house before stalking to his car. Not the familiar Tesla he usually drove, but a nondescript rental. As he drove away, the officer approached the front door and knocked gently. "Police?" he called. "Miss Price? Are you safe there?" I opened the door, relief washing over me at the sight of the uniformed officer. "Yes," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Thank you for coming so quickly." The officer, whose nameplate read Martinez, nodded reassuringly. "We take restraining order violations very seriously. Are you all right? Do you need medical assistance?" "No, I'm fine. Just rattled." Officer Martinez took a statement from both Rachel and me, documenting Mark's appearance and behavior. "We'll file this report immediately," he assured us. "If he returns or contacts you again, call us right away. In the meantime, we'll have patrols drive by regularly to check on the property." After the officer left, Rachel and I collapsed onto The living room sofa, the adrenaline crash leaving us both shaky and exhausted. That was too close, Rachel murmured. If the police hadn't arrived so quickly. I didn't want to contemplate what might have happened. Mark's face, contorted with rage as he glared at the house, haunted me. It was the face of a stranger, someone capable of who knew what. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Vanessa. "Diana," she began, her voice tight with urgency. "I've just heard from Gabriel. He's found something in the Morgan's financial records that changes everything. We need to meet, not at my office, somewhere more secure. And bring all the documentation you have, including your grandmother's will and any financial records related to your inheritance." "What's going on?" I asked, the alarm rising again. "What did Gabriel find?" "Not over the phone," Vanessa replied. "Meet me at the Boston Public Library in 2 hours, the rare manuscript reading room. It's quiet, secure, and public enough that no one would try anything." She hung up before I could ask further questions. I turned to Rachel, bewilderment adding to my already overwhelming emotional state. "Something's happened," I said. "Something big. Vanessa wants to meet at the library in 2 hours. Rachel's expression was resolute. "Then we'd better get ready. After Mark's visit, I don't think you should go anywhere alone." I gathered my grandmother's will, the inheritance documentation, and financial records I'd brought from Rachel's apartment, securing them in a leather portfolio. As I did so, my eye caught on a detail in the will that I hadn't paid much attention to before. A clause specifying that my inheritance included not just liquid assets, but also all business interests and investments held by the estate. What business interests had Nana L. held? As far as I knew, my grandmother had been a teacher who had invested wisely over the years, building a comfortable nest egg but not actively participating in any businesses. Yet the language was specific, suggesting there was more to her estate than I had realized. I made a quick call to James Richardson, my grandmother's financial advisor. "James, I'm looking at Nana's will, and there's mention of business interests and investments. Do you know what that refers to specifically?" There was a pause on the line before James responded. Eleanor had a diverse investment portfolio, but she was also a silent partner in several local businesses over the years. She preferred to remain anonymous in those ventures, said she didn't want recognition, just wanted to support entrepreneurs she believed in. "Do you have a list of those businesses?" I asked, a hunch forming in my mind. "I can pull that information together," James replied. "It might take a day or two to compile." "Everything? Could you prioritize anything related to hospitality or property development in Boston? Specifically, anything that might connect to the Morgan Hotel or Harborview Enterprises?" This time, the pause was longer. "Diana, what exactly are you looking for?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But it might be important, very important." "I'll see what I can find," James promised. "In the meantime, be careful. Boston's business community is smaller than people realize, and word travels fast about the questions you've been asking." Rachel drove me to the Boston Public Library, her nurse's calm efficiency a stark contrast to my growing anxiety. The enormity of what was unfolding, the financial crimes, Mark's violation of the restraining order, the mysterious new development Gabriel had uncovered, threatened to overwhelm me. "Whatever happens in there," Rachel said as we approached the library's impressive facade, "remember you're not alone. You have people fighting for you. And your grandmother was right. You're stronger than you know." The rare manuscript reading room was nearly empty when we arrived, just a few scholars bent over ancient texts at well-spaced tables. Vanessa and Gabriel were already there, heads close together in whispered conversation. They looked up as we approached, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and concern. "Thank you for coming," Vanessa said, rising to greet us. "And bringing support," she added with an approving nod toward Rachel. Gabriel remained seated, his thin face drawn with fatigue, but his eyes bright with discovery. Before him lay a stack of financial printouts, sticky notes protruding from various pages. "Ms. Price," he began as we settled at the table, "what I'm about to show you will be shocking. I need you to prepare yourself." I nodded, steeling myself, for whatever revelation was coming. "I'm ready." Gabriel opened a folder and extracted a document. An original incorporation filing for Morgan Hospitality Holdings, LLC, the parent company of the Morgan Hotel Group. "Look at the ownership structure," he directed, pointing to a section midway down the page. I scanned the text, noting the familiar breakdown. Mark Morgan, 51%, Victor Pelletier, the phantom investor, 15%, and 4 other investors with smaller percentages. Nothing I hadn't seen before. "Now look at this," Gabriel said, placing another document beside the first, an amendment to the incorporation filing dated 3 years ago, shortly after the Morgan had opened. "Pay particular attention to the ownership transfers." This document showed a complex series of transactions, reassigning percentages of ownership among the investors. Most notably, Victor Pelletier's share had increased from 15% to 25%, while one of the minor investors had been removed entirely. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at Gabriel. "What am I missing?" "The identity of the investor who was bought out," Gabriel replied quietly. "Eleanor Roberts Trust." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. "Eleanor Roberts. That's my grandmother." "Nana L. was an investor in the Morgan?" Gabriel nodded grimly. "Not just an investor. According to the original filings, she provided 20% of the initial capital, $4 million. But 3 years ago, her interest was bought out by the other investors, primarily by the entity listed as Victor Pelletier." "That's impossible," I whispered. "She never mentioned this to me, never said a word about investing in Mark's hotel." "There's more," Vanessa interjected, her expression grave. "Show her the transfer documents, Gabriel." Gabriel produced another set of papers, bank records showing a wire transfer of $4.8 million from Morgan Hospitality Holdings to the Eleanor Roberts Trust. "This was the buyout payment," he explained. "But notice the date." I stared at the timestamp, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This transfer was made 2 weeks after her death, I realized aloud. How is that possible? Who authorized it? Gabriel and Vanessa exchanged glances. It was Vanessa who answered, her voice carefully controlled. "That's what we've been trying to determine. According to the signature on the transfer authorization, it was approved by the trustee of your grandmother's estate." She paused. "The trustee's signature on the document is yours, Diana." The full horror of what she was suggesting crashed over me like a tidal wave. "But I didn't." I looked from Vanessa to Gabriel to Rachel, panic rising. "I never signed anything authorizing the sale of Nana's share in the Morgan. I didn't even know she was an investor until this moment." "We believe you," Vanessa assured me quickly. "Which means someone forged your signature on the transfer documents. Given the timing and circumstances, there's really only one person who had both the motive and the opportunity." The truth hit me with sickening clarity. "Mark," I whispered. "Mark forged my signature to buy out my grandmother's share of his business. Using what money?" "That," Gabriel said grimly, "is where the money laundering comes in. The $4.8 million paid to buy out Eleanor's share appears to have come directly from those suspicious Harborview Enterprises transactions we identified earlier. In essence, Mark used illegally obtained funds to purchase your grandmother's legitimate investment in the Morgan, effectively laundering millions while consolidating control of the hotel under himself and his phantom partner, Victor Pelletier." My mind reeled with the implications. Mark hadn't just been laundering money through his hotel operations. He had stolen from my grandmother's estate, from me, using forged documents and illicit funds. "There's one more thing," Gabriel added softly. "Under Massachusetts law, as Eleanor's sole heir, you inherited not just her liquid assets, but all her business interests, including her 20% stake in the Morgan Hotel Group. But her share was bought out, I objected, struggling to follow the legal implications. A transaction executed with a forged signature is invalid, Vanessa explained, which means, legally speaking, your grandmother's 20% share of the Morgan never changed hands. That share belongs to you, Diana. You are, right now, a significant owner of your husband's hotel. The revelation landed like a thunderbolt, illuminating everything that had happened over the past days in a stark new light. Mark's desperate insistence that I transfer my inheritance, his rage when I refused, his increasingly frantic attempts to contact me after the restraining order. It wasn't just about wanting my grandmother's money for his Chicago expansion. It was about covering up the crime he'd already committed, the theft of her investment, executed through forgery and paid for with laundered funds. So what happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa's expression was like steel. Now, Ms. Price, we go on the offensive. Mark Morgan is about to discover that the woman he underestimated, the woman he struck when she wouldn't bend to his will, is actually holding all the cards. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something beyond fear or confusion. I felt a cold, clarifying anger, and beneath it, a sense of justice long delayed but finally within reach. Tell me what to do, I said. We need to move simultaneously on several fronts, Vanessa explained as we gathered around the conference table in her office's secure back room. Present were Gabriel, Rachel, James Richardson, and a new addition to the team, Catherine Jimenez, a former prosecutor now specializing in financial crimes who'd agreed to consult on our case. First, Vanessa continued, tapping a stack of papers, we've filed an emergency petition with the probate court to invalidate the transfer of Eleanor's shares in the Morgan Hotel Group, citing forgery and fraud. We've requested an immediate freeze on all Morgan Hospitality Holdings assets, pending investigation. What happens if the court grants the freeze? I asked. Catherine answered, her voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to courtrooms. It effectively paralyzes Mark's business operations. No transfers, no new contracts, no expansion plans. Everything stops until ownership is clarified. Second, Vanessa continued, we've prepared a comprehensive filing for the district attorney's office detailing the evidence of money laundering, forgery, and fraud. Catherine has reached out to her contacts there to ensure it receives immediate attention. Catherine nodded grimly. The DA's Economic Crimes Unit has been building cases against several money laundering operations in Boston. They'll be very interested in what we've uncovered about the Morgan. And finally, Vanessa said, we've engaged private security for Diana. Given Mark's violation of the restraining order and the potential involvement of unknown associates, we're not taking any chances. This last item had been a point of contention. I'd initially resisted the idea of security as excessive, but Vanessa and Gabriel had been insistent. Anyone willing to launder millions of dollars won't hesitate to take extreme measures when cornered, Gabriel had argued, and the others had agreed. Now, as we refined our strategy, I found myself oddly calm despite the storm gathering around. Me. The shock of discovering Nana L's connection to the Morgan had given way to a cold clarity. This wasn't just about my divorce anymore, or even about Mark's betrayal. It was about honoring my grandmother's legacy and ensuring justice for the fraud committed against her estate, against me. There's one thing I still don't understand, I said, interrupting the technical discussion of financial filings. Why did Nana invest in Mark's hotel in the first place? And why keep it a secret from me? James, who had been quietly following the conversation, cleared his throat. I might be able to shed some light on that. I've been reviewing Eleanor's notes and correspondence from that period. He extracted a folder from his briefcase. Eleanor initially declined to invest in the Morgan. She had concerns about Mark's business plan and, frankly, about his character. So what changed her mind? I asked. Mark came to her directly, without your knowledge. According to her notes, he presented a revised business plan that addressed her concerns. More importantly, he appealed to her desire to secure your future. James paused, his expression softening. Eleanor was always worried about you, Diana. Your parents' death left her as your only family, and she was determined to ensure you would be provided for after she was gone. So she invested to help secure my future with Mark, I said, the irony bitter on my tongue. Yes. But she wasn't naive. She insisted on terms that would protect her investment, and ultimately your interests. Her 20% stake came with specific voting rights and protections, including a seat on the board and access to all financial records. James smiled grimly. I suspect that's why Mark was so eager to buy out her share after she passed. Those terms would have given you significant oversight of his operations once you inherited her position. Which would have exposed the money. Laundering, Gabriel added. Exactly. James nodded. As for why she kept it secret from you, Eleanor was old-fashioned in some ways. She believed a marriage should stand on its own merits, not on financial entanglements. She wanted you and Mark to build your relationship independent of her influence. The revelation cast my grandmother in a new light, still the wise, loving woman I had known, but also a shrewd businesswoman who had tried to protect me even as she respected my choices. It made her final letter to me even more poignant. Trust. Your instincts, my darling girl, they're better than you know. Our strategy session was interrupted by Vanessa's assistant, who entered with an urgent message. The judge has granted the emergency petition. Assets frozen, effective immediately. A ripple of tension-breaking congratulations went around the table. The first domino had fallen. Now we wait for Mark's response, Vanessa said, her expression both triumphant and wary. He'll be served with the court order within the hour. We didn't have to wait long. Barely 90 minutes later, my phone exploded with calls and texts from Mark, each more desperate and angry than the last. I handed the phone to Catherine, who documented each contact as a violation of the restraining order. He's panicking, she observed clinically. Good. Desperate people make mistakes. The most telling response came not from Mark directly, but from his lawyer, a terse email to Vanessa requesting an immediate meeting to discuss settlement terms. Vanessa's smile was predatory. Translation: they're terrified and want to negotiate before this goes any further. She looked at me. How do you want to handle this? I considered the question carefully. Part of me wanted nothing more than to reject the meeting outright, to push forward with exposing every last detail of Mark's crimes to the authorities. But another part, the part that had loved Mark, that still struggled to reconcile the charming man I'd married with the criminal, he'd become hesitated. Let's hear what they have to say, I decided finally. But on our terms, not theirs. Vanessa nodded approvingly. My thoughts exactly. We'll set the meeting for tomorrow morning, here in my office. Full team present. That night, I returned to my grandmother's house under the watchful eye of David Mercer, the ex-military security specialist Vanessa had engaged. His quiet professionalism was reassuring as he checked the property's perimeter, tested the alarm system, and established a small command center in what had once been Nana L's sewing room. Ms. Price, he said, completing his inspection. The house is secure. I'll be monitoring the perimeter overnight. If anything strikes you as unusual, any sounds, calls, unexpected visitors, alert me immediately. I thanked him, then retreated to my grandmother's study, where I'd been sleeping since moving into the house. The familiar surroundings, her, books, her antique desk, the faint scent of her perfume that still lingered in the air, brought comfort amid the chaos my life had become. As I prepared for bed, I found myself drawn to the small writing desk where Nana L had penned countless letters throughout her life. On impulse, I opened the central drawer, running my fingers along the smooth wood where her hands had rested. In the back corner, something caught my attention. a small, almost imperceptible notch in the otherwise perfect craftsmanship. Curious, I pressed it gently. To my surprise, a hidden compartment at the back of the drawer slid open, revealing a small leather-bound notebook. My grandmother's distinctive handwriting filled its pages, not a diary, but what appeared to be observations and notes about various business matters, including several entries marked simply MM, with dates corresponding to the period when the Morgan was being established. I settled into her reading chair, wrapping myself in the cashmere throw she'd always kept nearby, and began to read. The entries were detailed and insightful, revealing a side of my grandmother I'd only glimpsed. The shrewd investor, the careful observer of human nature, the woman who had built her own financial security from modest beginnings. The entries about Mark were particularly revealing. She had noted his charm, his ambition, his talent for making people feel special when he wanted something from them. But she had also documented inconsistencies in his stories, moments when his mask had slipped to reveal a calculating coldness beneath. MM again pressed for larger investment, one entry read. Claimed new investor, VP, ready to commit if I match funds. Something off about this VP character. Too convenient, never available for meetings. Must investigate before proceeding. And later, agreed to investment with strict conditions. MM displeased but accepted terms, not convinced of his business. Acumen, but Diana loves him. This way I can keep watch over both the investment and her interests. Have instructed Jay to maintain separate documentation of all transactions. Jay? James Richardson, I realized. My grandmother had created her own parallel record-keeping system for her investment in the Morgan, anticipating potential issues. The final entry about Mark, dated just weeks before her death, sent a chill through me. MM increasingly evasive. About financial reports, claims computer system upgrade delayed quarterly statements? Convenient excuse. Have asked Jay to initiate an audit. Something isn't right. Must protect Diana's interests before it's too late. She had known, or at least suspected, that something was amiss with Mark's business, and she had been taking steps to investigate, right up until her final illness had intervened. I clutched the notebook to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Even in her final weeks, Nana L. had been fighting for me, trying to uncover the truth about the man I had married. Had Mark somehow learned of her suspicions? Had that accelerated his plan to eliminate her oversight by buying out her share once she was gone? I fell asleep in the reading chair, the notebook still in my hands, my grandmother's presence seeming to envelop me like a protective embrace. Morning brought renewed determination. I photographed every page of Nana L's notebook before carefully placing it in my bag to share with the legal team. This was more than evidence now. It was my grandmother's final gift to me, a roadmap to understanding the deception that had shaped my marriage. Vanessa's office buzzed with controlled energy as our team prepared for the meeting with Mark and his attorneys. Gabriel had compiled a comprehensive summary of the financial evidence. Catherine had prepared an outline of potential criminal charges. James had brought copies of all documentation related to Eleanor's investment in the Morgan. Remember, Vanessa coached me, you hold the power in this meeting. Mark wants to contain the damage and protect himself. Our goal is to secure your interests, financial and legal, while ensuring accountability for what he's done. I nodded, smoothing the lapels of the navy blue suit I'd chosen for the occasion. Eleanor's notebook rested in my bag, a tangible reminder of why I was fighting. At precisely 10 a.m., Vanessa's assistant announced the arrival of Mark and his legal team. My heart pounded as the door opened, revealing Mark in a sharply tailored suit, flanked by two attorneys, a severe-looking woman in her 50s and a younger man carrying multiple briefcases. For a moment, our eyes locked across the conference room. Mark's expression shifted rapidly from confidence to shock as he registered the assembled team confronting him, finally settling into a carefully constructed mask of contrition. "Diana," he began, taking a step toward me. "Ms. Price will—" "Not be addressed directly," Vanessa interrupted smoothly. "All communication goes through counsel. As stipulated in the restraining order, you've already violated multiple times." Mark's jaw tightened, but he retreated to his side of the table without further comment. His lead attorney, who introduced herself as Margaret Fulton, took the lead. "We appreciate the opportunity to meet," she began, her voice precise and measured. "My client is eager to resolve this matter quickly and discreetly for the benefit of all parties involved." "By matter, do you mean the domestic violence, the forgery of Ms. Price's signature, the fraudulent transfer of Eleanor Roberts's shares, or the money laundering operation run through the Morgan Hotel?" Catherine asked pleasantly. "We should be clear about which crimes we're discussing." The blood drained from Mark's face. His attorneys exchanged alarmed glances. "Those are serious allegations," Margaret replied after a moment. "Unsubstantiated allegations that could be damaging to all parties if made public." "Oh, they're quite substantiated," Vanessa countered, sliding a folder across the table. "This is a summary of the evidence we've compiled. Financial records, transfer documents with the forged signature, documentation of the money flow through Harborview Enterprises. We have copies of everything, securely stored in multiple locations." Margaret opened the folder, the younger attorney leaning in to examine the contents with her. Mark stared straight ahead, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "We're prepared to offer a very generous settlement," Margaret said finally, closing the folder. "Mr. Morgan will agree to an uncontested divorce with a substantial financial package for Ms. Price. In return, these concerns remain private." "That's your opening position?" Vanessa's tone was one of amused disbelief. "Your client commits forgery, fraud, and money laundering, and your offer is an uncontested divorce?" "The alternative benefits no one," Margaret replied coolly. "A protracted legal battle, public allegations, potential damage to reputations on all sides. Surely we can find a more civilized resolution." I leaned forward, unable to remain silent any longer. "You still don't understand the position you're in?" I said, addressing Mark directly despite protocol. "This isn't a negotiation. It's a courtesy notification of what's about to happen." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Mark's face. "What does that mean?" Vanessa took over smoothly. "It means we've already submitted evidence of financial crimes to the district attorney's office. It means the court has already invalidated the fraudulent transfer of Eleanor Roberts's shares in the Morgan. It means Ms. Price is now the legal owner of 20% of your business, a business that's currently frozen by court order and under investigation for money laundering." Mark's composure cracked. "You can't. This will destroy everything." "You destroyed it," I interrupted, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "The moment you decided to forge my signature, the moment you struck me, the moment you chose to build your business on lies and crime." Mark turned to his attorneys, panic evident in his expression. "Do something," he hissed. Margaret attempted to regain control of the meeting. "Perhaps we should take a short recess to consider our positions." "By all means," Vanessa agreed readily. "Though I should mention that representatives from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit are meeting with the DA at this very moment, reviewing the evidence we've provided. Their timetable may not accommodate extended negotiations." The younger attorney whispered urgently to Margaret, who played visibly. 10 minutes, she requested. "We need 10 minutes to confer privately." As Mark and his legal team retreated to a small meeting room adjacent to the conference room, our team exchanged cautiously optimistic glances. "He's rattled," Catherine observed quietly. "And his attorneys know they're in a precarious position. Representing a client is one thing. Becoming accessories to ongoing financial crimes is another matter entirely." "What do you think they'll offer?" Rachel asked, squeezing my hand supportively under the table. "It doesn't matter," I said with sudden clarity. There's no settlement, offer that can erase what Mark did. To my grandmother, to me, to whoever else was harmed by his schemes. I turned to Vanessa. I don't want a deal. I want justice. Vanessa studied me for a moment, then nodded with something like pride. Then that's what we'll pursue. When Mark and his attorneys returned, the mood had shifted palpably. Margaret spoke first, her professional demeanor strained. We've consulted with our client and would like to propose alternative terms. Mr. Morgan is prepared to relinquish all claims to Ms. Price's inheritance, acknowledge her 20% ownership of the Morgan Hotel Group, and provide full cooperation with any financial investigation in exchange for Ms. Price's support in securing leniency regarding potential charges. It was a remarkable capitulation, from denying any wrongdoing to offering full cooperation in less than 10 minutes. Mark must truly be desperate. Vanessa glanced at me, silently seeking my direction. I met Mark's gaze across the table, seeing not the charming, confident man I had married, but a cornered, frightened stranger. No, I said simply. I won't support leniency for crimes committed against my grandmother's estate. Against me! Diana, please! Mark broke protocol again, his voice cracking. You don't understand what will happen if this goes forward. It's not just me who'll be affected. There are other people involved, dangerous people. Are you threatening? Miss Price? Catherine interrupted sharply. No, I'm trying to protect her, Mark insisted. There are aspects to this situation she doesn't understand. Like Victor Pelletier? I asked quietly. The phantom investor with a dead man's name? Or the money flowing through Harborview Enterprises? I understand more than you think, Mark, including why you were so desperate to get your hands on my inheritance. The Chicago expansion wasn't about growing the business. It was about creating a new laundering channel, wasn't it? Because someone was pressuring you to increase capacity. The blood drained from Mark's face, confirming my guess. The pieces had fallen into place during my night with Nana L's notebook. The frantic push for expansion, the mysterious Victor. Pelletier, Mark's escalating desperation as I refused to transfer my inheritance. It all pointed to external pressure, to Mark being caught in something bigger than himself. Ms. Price? Margaret interjected urgently. I strongly advise against pursuing this course of action. There are complications. She was interrupted by a commotion in the reception area. Vanessa's assistant burst in, her expression alarmed. Federal agents, she announced breathlessly. They're here with a warrant for Mr. Morgan. The conference room door opened wider, revealing two grim-faced agents in suits displaying FBI credentials. Behind them stood a third person, a woman, in her 40s with short dark hair and an air of quiet authority, whom Catherine immediately recognized. Janet, she said, rising. I didn't expect the Bureau to move so quickly. The evidence was compelling, the woman, apparently an FBI agent Catherine knew, replied. And certain aspects of the case are aligned with an ongoing investigation. Her gaze swept the room, settling on Mark. Mark Morgan? Mark stood frozen, the full weight of his situation finally crashing down on him. Yes, he managed. I'm Special Agent Janet Cortez, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and forgery. She gestured to the agents flanking her. Please come with us, sir. As the agents moved to escort Mark from the room, his eyes found mine one last time. Gone was the charm, the confidence, the careful mask he'd worn throughout our marriage. In that moment, I saw only fear and a desperate, silent plea. Diana, he whispered, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Then he was gone, led away in handcuffs, his attorneys hurrying after him in disarray. The room fell silent. I sat motionless, a storm of emotions washing through me, relief, vindication, grief for what might have been, and beneath it all, a strange sense of peace. It was over. The truth had emerged, and with it, justice for my grandmother and myself. Are you all right? Rachel asked gently, her hand warm on my shoulder. I nodded, unable to find words immediately. Finally, I said, I think I need some air. Vanessa nodded understanding. Take all the time you need. We'll handle the details from here. I stepped out onto the small balcony adjoining Vanessa's office, gazing out over Boston's skyline. Somewhere in that urban landscape stood the Morgan Hotel, the business Mark had built on deception and crime, the business that now, ironically, was partly mine. Agent Cortez joined me a few minutes later, leaning against the balcony rail with careful professionalism. Ms. Price, she began, I want to thank you for your courage in bringing this evidence forward. The operation your husband was involved with has been on our radar for some time, but we lacked the internal financial documentation to move forward. Who is Victor Pelletier? I asked. The real one, behind the fake identity. Cortez hesitated, weighing how much to share. We believe the name is being used by representatives of an organized crime syndicate with operations throughout New England. They've been laundering money through legitimate businesses for years. The Morgan was one of their more sophisticated operations. And Mark? Was he part of this syndicate? Based on preliminary evidence, we believe your husband was recruited after he acquired the Harborview building. The syndicate recognized the potential for a hotel operation as a laundering vehicle and approached him with financing. Once he accepted their investment, he was compromised. She paused. That doesn't excuse his actions, especially what he did to you and your grandmother's estate, but it may explain his desperation. I absorbed this information, fitting it into the narrative that had emerged over the past days. Mark hadn't started as a criminal mastermind. He'd been an ambitious businessman who made a Faustian bargain, then found himself trapped in escalating criminality. What happens now? I asked. Mr. Morgan will be processed and charged. Given the evidence and his position in the operation, he's facing significant federal charges. His best option is cooperation, identifying others involved, providing details of the financial structures. Cortez's expression softened slightly. As for you, Ms. Price, my advice is to focus on rebuilding your life. The legal process will take time, but your courage has already made a difference. As Cortez returned inside, I remained on the balcony, watching clouds drift across the Boston sky. The path forward was unclear. Untangling my financial connections to the Morgan, navigating the legal aftermath of Mark's arrest, rebuilding a life that had been fundamentally altered by betrayal and deception. Yet, despite the uncertainty, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in my adult life, I was truly in control of my own destiny. No more deferring to Mark's plans, no more suppressing my instincts, no more compromising my dreams for someone else's ambitions. Trust your instincts, Nana L. had written. They're better than you know. She had been right all along. And wherever her spirit might be, I hoped she was witnessing this moment of truth and justice, the moment when the granddaughter she had sought to protect finally found her strength and claimed her power. When I returned to the conference room, the team was already discussing next steps, the legal implications of Mark's arrest, the status of the Morgan Hotel, the process of officially establishing my ownership stake. I listened quietly, gradually finding my voice to ask questions and express preferences. There's one thing I want to do, I said finally, interrupting a technical discussion of asset forfeiture procedures. I want to establish that scholarship foundation at the Museum of Fine Arts, the one I mentioned to Mark before. I touched my cheek unconsciously. Before everything fell apart, in my grandmother's name, to honor her as she deserved to be honored. Vanessa smiled warmly. I think that's a perfect way to begin this new chapter. A new chapter. The phrase resonated within me as I gathered my belongings, preparing to leave with Rachel. The story of my life with Mark had ended, But my own story continued, shaped by this experience but not defined by it, strengthened by adversity but not hardened by it. Outside the office building, autumn sunlight bathed Boston in a golden glow, reminiscent of that day when everything had changed, when Mark's hand had struck my face and broken the illusion of our perfect marriage. But this time, instead of fear and confusion, I felt only determination and hope. "Ready?" Rachel asked, car keys in hand. I nodded, stepping into the sunlight. Ready for whatever comes next. 6 months passed with remarkable speed. Winter descended on Boston, transforming the city with snow and ice before yielding to the first tentative buds of spring. Throughout these changing seasons, I found myself navigating a complex legal landscape while simultaneously rebuilding my sense of self. Mark's arrest had set in motion a cascade of legal proceedings that touched every aspect of my life. The divorce, once contested, became a straightforward matter after his arrest. His attorneys, recognizing the hopelessness of their position, negotiated a settlement that granted me the Beacon Hill house and all personal property, while detaching me from any potential liability for his crimes. The more complicated issue was the Morgan Hotel. As the legal owner of 20% of the business, I found myself in an unusual position when the FBI's investigation widened to encompass the entire operation. "The Bureau has 2 options," Agent Cortez explained during one of our regular meetings at her downtown office. "They can seize the business as an instrument of money laundering, or they can allow it to continue operating under new management, with strict oversight to prevent further criminal activity." "Which approach are they leaning toward?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. Given the hotel's profitability and status as a legitimate enterprise despite its misuse, they're inclined toward the second option. She studied me thoughtfully. "Which means your ownership stake becomes particularly significant. As an innocent party, your interest in the business is protected." The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark had desperately wanted me to invest my inheritance in his business, had struck me when I refused, and now I found myself not just an investor, but potentially a controlling stakeholder in the Morgan. "What would that mean in practical terms?" I asked. "You'd have options," Cortez replied. "You could sell your stake once the legal proceedings conclude. You could remain a passive investor under new management. Or, given the circumstances, you might be in a position to acquire additional shares at a favorable valuation, potentially becoming the majority owner." The idea was so unexpected that I laughed aloud. "Me? Run the Morgan? Why not?" Cortez's expression was serious. "You have a graduate degree in art history. You understand aesthetics, customer experience, cultural relevance, all critical factors in boutique hospitality. And you'd have experienced staff already in place to handle the operational aspects you're not familiar with." I left that meeting with my mind whirling, possibilities I'd never considered suddenly opening before me. The woman who had once deferred her own career ambitions to support her husband's business might now step into the role of business owner, herself. But first, there was Mark's criminal case to navigate. As the primary victim of his forgery and domestic violence, I was called to testify at several hearings. Each appearance required steeling myself to face the man who had once been the center of my world, now reduced to a defendant in prison garb, his confident demeanor replaced by a hollow-eyed desperation. During one such hearing, Mark finally accepted a plea agreement admitting to forgery, fraud, and money laundering in exchange for a reduced sentence contingent upon his continued cooperation with authorities investigating the larger criminal network. Before being led away, he was granted a moment to address the court. To my surprise, he turned toward me, his eyes seeking mine across the courtroom. "Diana," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I know words are inadequate for the harm I've caused. My choices, my weakness, my greed, my betrayal of your trust, they're unforgivable. I won't ask for your forgiveness because I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that loving you was the one true thing in my life. I corrupted everything else, but that was real. I sat motionless, tears burning behind my eyes but refusing to fall. Was this another manipulation? A performance for the judge's benefit? Or a genuine moment of clarity from a man finally confronting the consequences of his actions? I couldn't tell, and perhaps it didn't matter. Whatever truth existed in Mark's words, they couldn't undo what had happened between us. As he was escorted from the courtroom to begin serving his 8-year sentence, I felt a chapter closing definitively. The man I had married was gone, had perhaps never truly existed outside my own hopeful imagination. What remained was the task of building a future entirely my own. That future began to take shape in unexpected ways. With Vanessa's guidance, I established the Eleanor Roberts Scholarship Fund at the Museum of Fine Arts, fulfilling my original intention for my grandmother's inheritance. The fund would support emerging female artists, a fitting tribute to a woman who had nurtured creativity while building financial security. Nana would have loved this, I told Rachel as we attended the scholarship's launch event at the museum. Supporting women who are forging their own paths. Rachel squeezed my hand. She'd be proud of you, too, for finding your own path when everything fell apart. That path had indeed taken surprising turns. After much consideration and consultation with financial advisors, I made the decision to increase my stake in the Morgan Hotel. When the FBI completed its asset restructuring, I emerged as the majority shareholder, with 51% ownership of what was now officially renamed the Eleanor Boston. A fresh start, I explained to the assembled staff during my first address as owner. We're keeping what works, the dedication to customer experience, the attention to design and detail, while leaving behind any connection to the previous management's improprieties. Eleanor will stand for integrity, creativity, and excellence. Taking control of the hotel was the most terrifying and exhilarating step in my journey of reclamation. I knew nothing about hospitality management, but I knew about beauty, about creating environments that spoke to people, about honoring the authentic and discarding the artificial. And I knew, from bitter experience, how to recognize sincerity and its absence. I assembled a management team that complemented my creative vision with practical expertise, including Jason Edwards, Mark's former business partner who had been cleared of any involvement in the money laundering operation. "Why me?" Jason asked when I offered him the position of operations director. "After everything that happened with Mark, I assumed you'd want a completely fresh start." "Because you were the only one who questioned some of his decisions," I replied. "I found the board meeting minutes in the company records. You raised concerns about the Harborview transactions 3 separate times. Mark overruled you, but you saw something wasn't right. That's exactly the kind of integrity Eleanor needs. Under our joint leadership, the hotel flourished. I brought my art history background to bear, creating rotating exhibitions of local artists' work throughout the public spaces. We established a cultural program that connected guests with Boston's rich artistic and historical landscape. And we implemented a profit-sharing program for staff, ensuring that everyone who contributed to the hotel's success shared in its rewards. 1 year after Mark's arrest, the Eleanor was featured in Travel and Leisure as one of the top boutique hotels in New England, praised for its renaissance under new ownership and commitment to authentic luxury with a conscience. I kept the magazine on my desk in what had once been Mark's office, now transformed with light colors, comfortable furniture, and walls adorned with works by artists from the Eleanor Roberts Scholarship Program. It served as a tangible reminder of how far I had come, from the woman who had walked out of her home with a bruised cheek and a suitcase to the businesswoman confidently steering a successful enterprise. The second anniversary of what I now think of as the slap that changed everything found me in my grandmother's Cambridge house, which remained my home despite my ability to afford more luxurious accommodations. I had renovated certain aspects, updating the kitchen, adding a home office, but preserved the essential character of the place that had sheltered me during my darkest hours. Rachel arrived for our now traditional dinner, bringing a bottle of champagne and news of her recent promotion to head nurse in the emergency department. "To new beginnings," she toasted, raising her glass. "And to friends who stand by you when the world falls apart." "I couldn't have done any of this without you," I said, clinking my glass against hers. "You were my rock when I had nothing to stand on." "Don't sell yourself short," Rachel countered. "You had everything you needed inside you all along. You just needed the right circumstances to discover it." Those circumstances had been painful beyond measure: betrayal, violence, criminal conspiracy. Yet I couldn't deny that from that crucible had emerged a strength and clarity I might never have found otherwise. As we moved to the living room with our dessert, Rachel asked the question she posed every few months. "Have you heard anything from Mark?" I shook my head. "Not directly. His attorney contacted me about selling his remaining shares in the hotel. Apparently he's accumulated legal debt and needs the funds." "Are you going to buy them?" I had considered the question carefully. "Yes, I think so. It feels right to have complete ownership of the Eleanor, to remove the last financial tie between us." Rachel nodded approvingly. "Closure. That's important." "It's not just closure," I admitted. "It's about claiming something that was always partly mine, even when I didn't know it. Nana invested in that hotel believing in its potential to secure my future. She was right, just not in the way any of us could have imagined." Later that evening, after Rachel had gone, I found myself drawn to my grandmother's study. I sat at her writing desk, where I'd discovered her hidden notebook 2 years earlier, and reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. There were still moments when a memory of happier times with Mark would surface unexpectedly, bringing with it a complex tangle of emotions: grief for what might have been, anger at his betrayal, compassion for the desperate man he'd become. But those moments no longer defined me or limited my vision of the future. That future now stretched before me with possibilities I never could have envisioned while living in Mark's shadow. Eleanor was thriving. The scholarship fund was supporting its third cohort of promising female artists, and I had discovered in myself capabilities that had lain dormant during my marriage: leadership, creative vision, financial acumen. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my voice, the ability to speak my truth, to trust my instincts, to stand firmly in my own power even when faced with opposition or uncertainty. On impulse, I opened the drawer where I'd found Nana L's notebook, running my fingers along the hidden compartment that had revealed her secret observations. To my surprise, my touch dislodged another small item, an envelope I hadn't noticed before, tucked into the very back of the compartment. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. I recognized it immediately as my grandmother's, a piece she had worn on special occasions throughout my childhood. Accompanying it was a small note card with her distinctive handwriting: "For Diana, when she finds her strength. Until then, know I am always with you, believing in the woman you will become. With all my love, Nana L." Tears welled as I fastened the locket around my neck, feeling its weight settle against my skin like a benediction. My grandmother had somehow known this moment would come, had prepared for it, had trusted I would find my way through whatever challenges life presented. Standing at the window, I gazed out at the spring evening, Cambridge's historic streets bathed in the soft glow of street lamps. 2 years ago, my world had shattered with a single violent act, revealing the rot beneath a seemingly perfect marriage. From those fragments, I had built something new, not just a business or a foundation, but a self that was wholly mine, no longer defined by relation to anyone else. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of crushing doubt, of fear so intense it threatened to paralyze me, of grief that seemed bottomless. But through it all, there had been growth, Painful, transformative growth that had forged me into someone stronger than I'd believed possible. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fires, Nana L. had written in her final letter to me. As I touched the locket at my throat, I understood the full meaning of her words. The fires of betrayal and loss had not consumed me. They had tempered me, creating something more resilient, more authentic, more powerful. Whatever the future holds, new challenges, new opportunities, perhaps someday even new love, I would face it as this woman I had become, Diana Price, no longer defined by her marriage or her trauma, but by her own strength, her own choices, her own vision for her life. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in longer than I could remember, cradled in the certainty that while the past had shaped me, it was the future, my future, that now called me forward, and I was ready to answer. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.